Simon Bennett, Power Rangers Dino Fury Season 2 is currently airing on Netflix. At least part 1 is. We're going to have to wait just a little bit longer for part 2, and I can't wait. Season 2 ended on such a high note for me. It hit every single episode. So good, Simon. How you doing, sir?
I'm very good, thank you. I can't wait for the last episodes to be available either, because I really want to see what fans of the show think of them.
Oh, I can't wait. Now, this season, you've worked previously on Beast Morphers, and Beast Morphers leaned a lot into the lore of Power Rangers. And this season, we see some hints of that with the Morphin Masters and a few other things. But did you want Dino Fury to be more of a standalone story, or were you always trying to ingrain it with the lore of Power Rangers?
I think it's important that the show acknowledges that there is a wider world than simply the particular team that happens to be at the center of that season.
Right.
And I think with Beast Morphers, and more so in Dino Fury, we have worked hard to integrate all the various seasons, which were very much made as their own adaptations without necessarily any kind of consistent lore from season to season.
Sure.
And just because people's brains work like this, viewers have tried to make connections and said, well, if this happened then that must have happened later, and these teams were probably coexisting at the same time, and that one has to be in a completely different universe, but only that one. You know, all those kinds of discussions and arguments that go on, which are fun. But from our point of view, and I think it happened in Beast Morphers, and it was to do with the Ranger Vault and the fact that Grid Battle Force had connections with other Power Ranger teams, and it very much established clearly that the other teams coexisted, and that there were ways of traveling between and communicating between different dimensions. Like the RPM world obviously was a different dimension because it was a different Corinth was quite different to the Earth, that, you know, all that stuff. And in another team, Dino Charge, dinosaurs still existed, so that had to be a different dimension. But most of the shows took place in the prime universe of Power Rangers, and who knows what the future may hold in terms of attempts to iron all this out, or throw it all out and start again from scratch. Who knows? But I do know that for us, we were trying to have some kind of consistent logic that would make sense to the super fans of the show who'd followed it since the beginning. And the Morphin Masters were an important way of trying to explain, really, a lot of the apparently unrelated and inconsistent ways in which various teams came to be Power Rangers or get their powers. And it was to say that, okay, you've got the Morphin grid here, you've got Ranger teams scattered all over the place, and then you've got this body of beings who actually have a relationship between the grid and the various Ranger teams, and are significant in the teams achieving their powers and becoming Power Rangers. I can tease the fact that that story isn't over yet. So if people enjoy the Morphin Masters lore, there's a big dump of that still to come in the remaining 11 episodes.
I was just going to say, as soon as you introduced the Morphin Masters in episode 1, like, I knew we were in for a different Power Rangers. You know what I mean? Like, it just felt like you dug that extra layer deeper for specifically the fan base that's me. That was like, yep, this one's for you guys. And I honestly, that does not go unappreciated. So thank you for that.
Well, I have to give credit to Becca Barnes and Alwyn Dale for a lot of this, because they know Power Rangers as well as probably the most dedicated super fan, and they care deeply about the show and not upsetting the fan base. And a lot of the things they've had to do for various political reasons historically has gone against the grain for them. So I think now for all of us, there's a sense of we're being trusted with the franchise to actually tell the kinds of stories that we feel the fan base deserve and would like to see. It's not perfect, it never will be perfect, but we're doing our best to honor the fans of the show.
You know, but it's those steps that are taken, and it doesn't go unnoticed. You, like, as a fan, you literally see the effort that's going in and trying to dig into that lore. And for that, I'm appreciative. As a longtime fan, there's a lot of payoff there, especially watching Dino Fury. There's certain scenes like Lord Zed. It's a great callback to my childhood. And I just kind of like freaked out. And I was like, wait a minute, that's Lord Zed, right? And you get these glimpses because I tried starting my kid in Mighty Morphin. She was not having it. And it wasn't until Dino Fury where she was completely invested into the show. So credit to you guys. Now, one of the coolest things that you guys did with this season is continue the world building with Rafcon. Was there any discussion having Ion and Zato from an already established planet in Power Rangers history prior to settling on Rafcon?
There was some discussion, but we decided to make it Rafcon because of the backstory that we wanted to go into quite deeply within the show. And as soon as you tie it to a pre-existing planet or world, then you actually have to fit the story within what is known about that particular world or system. So we wanted a fresh start with Rafcon. There was definitely discussion about some of the other known Power Rangers universe worlds and whether they might have come from there. But because of the history of the Sporix and the fact the planet was ravaged, and the fact there is more still to be discovered about Rafcon and episodes yet to be viewed, we wanted to keep it original.
You know, one thing that I was surprised we didn't see in season 2, part 1, was another appearance by Lord Zed. If one were to say what Lord Zed would be up to currently in the Power Ranger universe, what would Lord Zed be?
I think Lord Zed is probably licking his wounds and planning to do maximum mayhem.
I like that. Now, is there any chance that we're going to be able to get a follow-up on Mick? Because we did see him in season 1, and we don't know quite where he went off to. But is there any follow-up on where we can find Mick?
He went off in a space taxi. He was going to open a steak restaurant somewhere in the Lion Galaxy, I think. So that's probably what he's doing. And I can't say anything else in terms of plot details of the remaining episodes. But I will say that we love Mick, and that Kelson Henderson has been an important and loyal part of the show for many, many seasons now, in one form or another.
I love that. I love that. Now, one of the most unique things you've done as a producer is open up this line of communication between you and the fandom, especially on social media. What are some of the positive decisions being so, I guess, right to the fan base? You're direct right there with your Twitter. What are some of the positives about that?
I think the positives are that I can hear what the common complaints are about the show and assess those and think about whether, not do I take those notes and integrate them in the show, but what is behind those comments, and is it something that is worth influencing, and can I incorporate those thoughts in terms of influencing the show? But also, I think that two-way communication makes the adult fans of the show feel listened to and valued, and because they are important, and that online discussion and continuation of the exploration of the worlds of Power Rangers and the love of the characters and the love of the franchise is so important to its ongoing success, that the people who keep it alive and dedicate, many hours of their lives and many dollars of their income to supporting the franchise should be included in the larger world that is the Power Rangers franchise. I've always, ever since the internet became a relevant player, had a social media presence in terms of the shows I'm working on. And I used to live tweet while shows that I had produced or directed were being broadcast on television, because I enjoyed the direct relationship with the people who were watching it. And coming from a theatre background, one of the things I love about theatre is if you're sitting in the auditorium watching the audience watch a play that I've directed, you can feel immediately what's working, what isn't, what is the level of engagement between the audience and what's happening on stage, when are they laughing, when are they getting fidgety, you know, all that feedback is really important. But with screen work, because it's an artifact that you make in advance and then just send out into the ether, you don't tend to get that learning experience or that direct feedback, and ratings are only a tiny part of it.
Oh, yeah.
So what the online engagement does provide is a tangible and ongoing set of measures for me as to whether what the intentions behind what we're doing are, and whether they're working or not, or whether they're being misread, or the audience are not following our plans. Because what you do as a program maker is you try and manipulate the audience from moment to moment to moment. You want them to be engaged, you want them to be surprised, you want them to be appalled, you want them to be angry, you want them to be full of laughter, you want them to be enthusiastic, and you're playing that piece of music which is about the audience's engagement.
Right.
And listening to the feedback tells me whether what we're doing is working or not. And so I see that as quite important. But there are obviously downsides of that engagement too.
Sure.
And I had to back away a bit because I was just getting harangued online by people obsessively wanting to know whether their favorite Sentai season was going to be adapted or not, and why not, you know, quite
I saw this tweet
angry. Yeah, so I just had to say, look, I can't deal with this. I was getting hundreds and hundreds of tweets a day, and I'm happy to engage in, you know, intelligent conversation and, you know, answer any questions that I'm allowed to answer, and that isn't a spoiler and isn't sort of a breach of contract and is within my ability to answer. I don't mind that at all if I've got time. But the demands and the sense of aggressive entitlement that was coming through in some of those tweets, it got to be too much, really.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Now, by the way, eventually at some point, I feel like I would love to do a live watch along with you, mainly as like a DVD, like an audio commentary, because you have such a unique insight into the lens of Power Rangers that I haven't seen explored through anybody else yet. So I think that's your vision of Power Rangers is so fascinating and immersive. I absolutely love it. Now, upon taking the task to run the Power Ranger franchise, were there any interesting story arcs from past seasons that you loved or drew inspiration from for Dino Fury? Or did you take any inspiration from any other storyline from another medium?
No, basically. I think that, you know, each season we start from scratch. What is the world? What is the premise? What are the themes? What are the ideas? Who are these characters? What is the big story? What are the character stories? While being influenced by the Sentai footage that we're working with. So I think if we say, let's copy this or let's do that story again, right, then what you're doing is secondhand. Mm-hmm. And it's much more interesting from a creative point of view to try and stay fresh. I do think, though, after, you know, nearly 30 years of Power Rangers, it's inevitable that there's a certain amount of repetition, particularly when the formula of what makes a Power Rangers episode has been so prescriptive in the past. Right. So, you know, they're still going to fight rubber monsters. There's not much you can do about that. So the actual Ranger stories tend to be the more simplistic ones. We've tried to make the villain stories more interesting in Sure. Dino Fury with Tarek and Centaura. So there are more gray areas, and it's less, I want to conquer the universe, and you know, oh, I want to save my wife. Now that's an interesting motivation for doing bad things.
Super refreshing, yeah.
And also, you know, marital rift between the voids. Where's that going to end up? Those kinds of things are fun and interesting and fresh, I think, for this show.
Oh yeah.
And also the character arcs. Try. Although, you know, in a show like this, you do deal with archetypes to in a sense, but trying to come up with satisfying long-term arcs that we may not necessarily have seen before on Power Rangers, but are going to make the fans of each particular character feel that their investment in that character has been worthwhile because they've got something rewarding or fresh or new or a bit of insight out of it. So no, I would say that we try not to copy other things. We may reference, you know, other movies or
Sure.
other TV shows or Shakespeare in our discussion as we're talking about particular details, but we certainly wouldn't try and lift a story from somewhere else. Yeah.
Sure. Now, one of the most intriguing things about this season is, like Beast Morphers, we're given human antagonists to face off with the Power Rangers. And some might even say anti-heroes to an extent. But is it harder or easier to include characters like that in your story?
It's more interesting. I think it's easier just to have, a monster who wants to conquer the galaxy or wants to steal the power coins or wants to destroy the Rangers, because that's a one-note monster and you know what you're getting. I think having characters that are more nuanced with more layers to them makes the storytelling more interesting from a writing point of view, but also I think from an audience point of view, because it's more surprising and less predictable. So yeah, there's a lot more to be unraveled with Void Knight and Void King, as he now is, and Void Queen, and where that story is going to go, and what their backstory is. Why does Centaura want to have revenge on humankind? That's very deliberately set up as a key dramatic question, which will be answered in the final 11. So yeah, it's fun, and it is all connected too with eking out rationing audience engagement across 44 episodes. So you're carefully placing key reveals and plot points in order to generate maximum intrigue.
I love that. I love that. Now, Ranger Liz asks, a while back you mentioned that you got the job because it was suggested by a friend. What made that friend think, wow, giant monsters and explosions, this guy would be perfect? By the way, she also adds, the friend was right, by the way. You're doing a fantastic job. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, thank you, Ranger Liz. That's really nice to hear. That person was an assistant director on another production who had worked on Power Rangers in that assistant director role. And I think what she was talking about was the fact that I have a capacity of dealing with large-scale logistics without getting fazed by them in order to achieve a clear creative goal. That's what I've always done. My theatre productions particularly have tended to be big shows with large casts and complicated theatrical effects. And I love the technology of storytelling in theatre. And in a way, in screen, it doesn't get any more technical than Power Rangers in terms of the action, the visual effects, the multiple units, the meshing of Japanese footage with original footage, the speed with which you have to work, the level of detail that has to go into the planning, all those kinds of things. Being able to multitask intensely while hanging on to a very clear vision, and bringing everyone else along for the ride, making sure that all the hundreds of people that you're collaborating with and all the many, many different departments all have a shared understanding of what it is you're trying to achieve and what's important. So that's something that I think I'm known for in all my work, from theatre through television, film, into Power Rangers. And I suspect that's what that person meant when she suggested I put my name forward for Power Rangers, which I did, and I didn't get the gig. So that was a few years ago now. I think that probably would have been for might have been Dino Charge.
Dino Charge?
Might have been Dino Charge, or even the season before that. Was it RPM? I can't remember what the sequence
Dino
was.
Charge, I think, would have been Megaforce.
Might have been Megaforce. Anyway, so that particular season, I think, was employing mainly not New Zealand directors. So I didn't even get an interview for that. But then I just put myself forward again a few years later, and Chip Lynn wanted to meet me, and we hit it off, and I got my first gig on Ninja Steel, which was a very steep learning curve, because there's nothing quite like it from a directing perspective. Power Rangers is its own unique beast.
Yeah.
But I loved it, and I took to it because the things I'm good at in other medium apply directly to Power Rangers. So even though it was unique and a learning experience for me. That the tools I was working with, I understood and I got. And also the thing with Power Rangers that's a lot of fun from a directing or a production point of view is you're having to be very inventive all the time.
Sure.
You read the stuff in a script that reads like an animated slapstick cartoon sequence, and you think, how on earth are we going to make this happen in real life in half a day on set? So it requires ingenuity and thinking outside the curve a little bit, as well as collaboration with some very smart and creative people. So I enjoy it, love it.
From top to bottom, I think Power Rangers is one of the most fascinating shows to get made, because not only do these actors go through this unique boot camp where it really teaches you everything about entertainment, but even you guys as showrunners, directors, you're adapting something from a Japanese show and making it completely either new or fresh, or putting a new. So you're kind of still handcuffed to a lot of things there. But you guys did such a fantastic job of really making it your own and using your own footage and matching up as best you could the locations, which is a phenomenal job on its own. With that being said, what was one of the most difficult challenges moving in from being a director to a showrunner?
That's a good question. It didn't feel that difficult because I have been a showrunner before on other shows. So it's for me,
it's so unique.
I know it is, but I'd already directed 2 seasons of it, so I knew how the machine worked, and because I was also a creative producer, I could look at the bigger picture from a production point of view. The area that I really had to learn about most, I think, was the post-production visual effects area, because although I've worked on shows with a small amount of visual effects, I have never worked on anything with quite this scale. And the fact that we had a year and a half of post-production after shooting had finished, which I was creatively responsible for, was a lot of fun, and I really liked it. But what I did was, when we wrapped on Beast Morphers, I followed Chip Lynn around, basically ghosting him, shadowing him for a few months. And that really taught me a lot about the extent of the role and all the various aspects which showrunner has to be across and in charge of, and the types of questions that you're going to get asked and the types of decisions that you have to make many times a day. So I learned a huge amount from Chip. And, you know, I'm working with great people who have been working on the show longer than me in many cases. So they've been generous about filling in the gaps where my knowledge might not be there. And I know to ask questions when I don't know, rather than pretend I do know and just bluff my way through, because that way disaster lies.
Absolutely. Now, I have 2 more questions for you and we are done. This question is coming at you as a fan. As a fan, look, we're on the precipice of the 30th anniversary of Power Rangers. I believe it's the 23rd longest show of all time running, which is an incredible feat. But as a fan, what would you like to see in the 30th anniversary for Power Rangers?
I would like to see something that satisfies the other fans, that people watch and go, yes, that is everything and more than I could possibly have wished for. I think that's all I can say, really. If I was a fan, that's what I would like to see for the 30th anniversary. I
mean, we're probably going to get that for Dino Fury's finale as well. The last question I have for you, and this isn't not necessarily because it's weak or anything like that, but if you could go back and redo any of the previous Power Ranger seasons, not because of anybody else that handled it, but just because it's a cool premise, what would that season be?
I actually think it would be Beast Morphers. And I say this because I knew it very well. I was a director right across both seasons, but I wasn't in a position where I could have any influence over the stories and the way in which they were shaped. So I thought that Beast Morphers had a lot of fantastic ingredients. I thought the designs were amazing. I thought the premise was really interesting. I thought the characters had a lot of potential, but it was still very much a product of the old school. This is the way a Power episode has to work. You have to tick all these particular boxes. And I think if some of those mandates were eased and more serial storytelling had been allowed.
Right.
And some of the things that were paid off late in the season had been established more clearly early up in the season. And that, the whole reveal of Evox as Venjix or Venjix as Evox, I can't remember which way around it goes, wasn't saved up to the very end, but it was teased and tantalized more. It's really about how you ration story across a season. If every episode has to be self-contained, and you have to have your obligatory comedy beats, and you have to have 2 ground fights and a Megazord fight, and you have to have your moral of the day and the apology scene, then there's not much room left in the episode for anything that's unique.
You got about 23 seconds in there, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But if those rules could be relaxed a bit on Beast Morphers, I think from what I know about it and what I know about the care that went into it, it wasn't lazy, and it wasn't, these shows the writers get a lot of flack for being bad writers. It's not that they're bad writers. It's the things that people find frustrating about the seasons are very often because the writers' hands are tied.
Yeah.
And there are so many gatekeepers, and there are so many cooks saying it has to be this, it has to be that, it has to be this. You can't do this, you can't do that. And I think that if the writers had been given a little bit more trust, Beast Morphers, which was a solid season, could have been a spectacular season.
Oh yeah, I couldn't agree more. It was a great season, though. It was a great season.
Yes, exactly.
But adding those little bits of cherries on top. Simon, this is why I like talking to you, man, because you have, like I said, you have this vision of Power Rangers that really aligns with what I think a lot of fans want, with what I want. So you're doing a fantastic job, and congratulations on the GLAAD Award. I got to say that before we wrap this up again, because it's such a historic moment as a Power Ranger fan. This sense of like, wow. This is a really cool moment, just all around for the fandom. So I got to say thank you for you and your writing staff and your team and everybody at Hasbro, because it's an amazing show. This Dino Fury has been out of the park. Like I said, you knocked it out of the galaxy. But thank you so much for your time, Simon. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we can do this again.
Absolutely. Nice to talk. Thank you very much.